And joining us now is Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, David Benjamin. Hi, thank you so much for coming in.
Pleasure to be here.
David, Netanyahu has already approved plans for an operation in Rafah. We know that they exist, they're ready to go, but there are many international and diplomatic pressures, certainly from the United States as well. What is your assessment of this situation? What should Israel do at this point?
Well, I think it's pretty clear militarily what the advantage would be for Israel of going to Rafah sooner rather than later, because it involves maintaining the momentum of the operation. If everything now has to go on the back burner, that gets complicated for the IDF, stagnation, stuck in the mud, etc. But at the same time, Israel must listen to its allies. We need to show them the utmost gratitude and respect. That's, of course, particularly the United States, but also other allies, the UK, in Europe. We have to hear them out. We have to hear what they have to say. Even if we're not sure they'll be able to just suggest something we didn't know already, we have to do that. I think the main concern of the Americans in particular is the humanitarian aspect, and justifiably so. There are over 1 million Palestinians now concentrated in the relatively small area of Rafah.
Right.
But the IDF has shown that it does take extreme efforts, in fact, to avoid damage to civilians, in the same way that it evacuated people from northern Gaza and from parts of Khan Yunis. I'm sure the IDF has plans to do the same in Rafah. We're not just talking about a complete, total bombardment of Rafah. It would involve the same kind of strategy. I'm not sure we've succeeded in convincing our allies that we have a viable plan to do that. So maybe we're stuck there, but I believe we can get past that. We can convince them and then be able to move ahead.
So to listen to our allies, certainly the U.S. is Israel's strongest ally, best friend, if you will. But there is an Israeli delegation heading to Washington to discuss the Rafah operation. And the U.S. seems to think that there are alternatives to this full-blown operation. What could those be? Well,
I've been trying to think through what the alternatives could possibly be. So one would be just to create a sort of Hamas enclave in Rafah long term. But of course, the problem would be that would remain a Hamas enclave. It means Hamas is still on its feet and can still bounce back potentially long term. It also means the IDF will have to be engaged in Gaza much more deeply in order to contain this Hamas enclave in Rafah. Like, certainly, it's a more attractive proposition to get, well, to render Hamas neutralized altogether, not have them as players in the region. Then we can talk about the day after more effectively with a longer-term view. So it's kind of it will be a short-term solution and not a good one, not for the IDF. In fact, I don't think for the Palestinians either.
Now, what about the humanitarian situation? You mentioned this. We know there are about 1.4 million Palestinians located in the specific region of Rafah, as you mentioned earlier. According to international law, what must Israel do in order to ensure that there are no so-called war crimes, that they do ensure and engage in a way that secures these civilian lives? Well,
first of all, an operation in Rafah would not be illegal per se. In other words, it's totally legal as long as you apply the law of war. Okay, what does that mean? In a nutshell, it means you cannot attack civilians. You can only attack military targets. And the other thing is you have to maintain the principle of proportionality, which means even when you're going after the military targets, you've got to take potential civilian casualties and civilian damage into account. And if it would be out of proportion or excessive, then you can't attack. But certainly if you take the required precautions, like evacuating civilians, okay, like we've done in other parts of the Strip, would be completely legal and completely legitimate. You know, maybe not popular, but certainly in terms of legality, it would be fine.
And so looking at the general operation, the general war that has been taking place elsewhere in the Gaza Strip, we know that there are many in the world that are saying that Israel is committing war crimes, that it has not followed international law. What would you have to say to that?
Well, I would say they don't have enough information to be able to make that sort of call. Okay? In order to determine whether war crimes have been committed, one has to have proof of a deliberate attack on civilians, or else a clearly disproportionate attack on a military target which caused disproportionate harm to civilians. I don't think anyone has that information right now. I'm pretty confident because I know the IDF, and I know the IDF takes quite significant legal advice and knows how to operate according to the laws of war, and in fact goes beyond the laws of war in taking care not to cause harm to civilians. And in fact, as many civilian casualties may have been caused in Gaza, still the ratio of civilian casualties to military casualties on the enemy side, in the context of war, obviously, not in the context of peace, obviously it's shocking, but in a war, that ratio is certainly well within what's considered acceptable.
And we know that there are still 4 Hamas battalions inside Rafah, and it's suspected that many hostages are held there as well. So it's very hard to see. It doesn't seem like an operation in Rafah can be avoided.
Well, again, I mean, what you could do is besiege Rafah. I mean, remember that the sensitivity with Rafah too is because it borders Egypt. And Hamas has been substantially arming itself over the years because of that border with Egypt. You know, Israel would ideally, in order to really get control of the situation and enable a day after, which really serves everybody, would need control of that strip of the border with Egypt. So it's not just Hamas being there, it's the border too.
David Benjamin, thank you so much.
My pleasure.